Save mental energy managing your WordPress site with easy-to-use DIY features from WP Engine's managed WordPress hosting. Visit wpengine.com/loveyourwork for up to 4 months free. This is Love Your Work. Wherever you are in your journey towards entrepreneurial enlightenment, we have the people and the tools to help you carve out your own version of success. I'm David Cadvey, and I'm a best-selling author and entrepreneur. I've built a business and life according to my own values, and I want to help you do the same. So, every Thursday, I love bringing you a new episode in which I dissect the unique path of a guest. How did they turn struggles into opportunities? How did they cut out the noise to focus? And where were the clues that led them to their calling? Or I bring you lessons from my own journey. If this is your first time listening, be sure to check out some of our most popular episodes. Jason Fried on episode 1, Ryan Holiday on episode 31, Elise Bauer on episode 33. And if this is your first time listening, I promise my audio is usually quite a bit better. I am back in my apartment in Chicago, prepping for my move to Columbia, and it's just plain really noisy here, and there's not much that can be done about it. In this episode, we go into the realm of health and diet. Now, there's no doubt that our guest today is a great example of turning a challenge into an opportunity, but I was more interested in her area of expertise. You may have already seen the inspiring TEDx talk of Dr. Terry Wahls. She has MS, and she was confined to a wheelchair for 4 years, but using her knowledge of biology, Dr. Terry engineered a diet based upon paleo and ketogenic principles to feed the power centers of her cells, and now she rides her bike to work, and she's out of the wheelchair. Dr. Terry is now running clinical trials based upon her diet protocol and has written a book. I recently picked it up, The Wahls Protocol, to seek relief from chronic inflammation that I've experienced, and I've implemented her diet with really great results. I have a lot less pain, I've got more energy. I've also noticed my mental performance has improved a lot. You can pick up the book at cadvey.net/Wahls. That's WAHLS. In this interview, we cover some of the building blocks of Dr. Terry's diet. What really does paleo mean? And how does this ketosis thing that you've heard so much about lately really work? And what does it mean for your health, especially for epilepsy and cancer? And what does someone really mean when they say a diet is detoxifying? How does detoxification work? What are the challenges in improving and implementing dietary treatments? And how do you evaluate the potential upsides or downsides of experimental approaches in general? We'll even talk about stem cell transplants, fecal transplants, and the microbiome. So if you or anyone close to you is battling an illness, you're probably going to find something useful in this interview. And even if you are completely healthy, you'll hear interesting and exciting things on the frontiers of health. Here's the interview. Want to maximize your email marketing? You should try ActiveCampaign. I switched last year from MailChimp, and I love it. With email marketing, marketing automation, and a sales CRM, it's a powerful, intuitive, and complete platform. Claim your 14-day free trial of ActiveCampaign at activecampaign.com/loveyourwork. I am here with Dr. Terry Wahls, author of The Wahls Protocol. Dr. Terry, how did you come to develop The Wahls Protocol?
This was part of my recovery program. I had developed a progressive illness that was not responding to conventional therapy. And so after years of experimentation, I would ultimately create this very intensive diet and lifestyle program that turned around my health, and I now call this the Wahls Protocol.
And I saw your TEDx talk, and basically, so you have had MS for a number of years now, and for roughly 4 years or so, you were confined to a wheelchair, correct?
Yeah, tilt recline wheelchair. And I'd gotten so disabled that I could not sit, in a regular desk chair. I couldn't sit up anymore. I had a zero gravity chair, one that had me tilted, fully reclined, so my knees were higher than my nose, or I was in bed. So I was in a very disabled state by the fall of 2007.
Yeah, and these days, you ride your bike to work?
I bike to work. It's about 5 miles. I swim. I have a little mat exercise strength training routine that I do. Clearly cognition is good. Fatigue is gone. I'm writing books, doing science, traveling the world, giving lectures. Many, many wonderful, wonderful things.
So then, with all those things included, I'm assuming you're able to walk without a
Yes.
cane.
Yeah, I'm walking. Although I will tell you, I've have since developed spinal stenosis, so I'm back to using walking sticks again because of the back pain issues. But that has nothing to do with the MS.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify to people, you are not cured of MS. It's just that your symptoms have greatly improved.
Correct. And if for some reason, I'm traveling and I'm fed the, gluten grains,
Right.
my MS pain will turn on. I may develop hand weakness or difficulty swallowing, and I'll need steroids to get that all quieted down again. So as long as I follow my diet and lifestyle, I'm doing great. But if somehow I screw up the diet, or I get back to a very highly stressful environment, the MS pain will come back, and I may have some additional symptoms.
Mm-hmm. And your diet, I've read the book because I myself have some sort of a chronic inflammatory condition that my doctor calls chronic Lyme. I don't, based upon the research that I've read and stuff, I'm not convinced of that fact. But I've been using your diet the last couple of months, and I have found it very helpful. I feel very good. Can you explain to our listeners kind of the basis of the diet?
Oh, sure. So the diet and really the whole protocol is designed very specifically for brain cells, for mitochondria, to maximize the intake of key nutrients for the brain. And so this is a paleo diet, yes. So it's grain-free, reduced legumes, but it's lots of vegetables. 3 cups of green leafy vegetables, 3 cups of deeply pigmented things, carrots, beets, berries, 3 cups in the sulfur-rich category, specifically cabbage family, onion family, mushroom family. I prefer that people be meat eaters, although I do have ways of doing this as a vegetarian or vegan. And I like to see people have organ meat, fermented foods. If they're going to have nuts and seeds, I prefer that they be soaked for at least 2 to 4 hours. And I like to see some seaweed and sea salt in the diet.
Right. So just to kind of give people who aren't familiar an overview of the sort of the philosophical underpinnings of a paleo diet are basically that to try to emulate kind of a hunter-gatherer diet.
Yeah,
right?
and many people criticize the paleo diet because there are many variations of the paleo diet, because really there are many different clans that adapted their food to what was available in season in that region. And so the key thing is you're eating animals that you can catch, eggs seasonally, lots of leafy material, roots, maybe some seasonal berries. And it will be adapted to what's in your locale. Many of our modern day hunter-gatherers hear the meat part, and that's sort of where they stop. They don't eat nearly the amount of vegetables I think they need to eat. And they get seduced by these paleo desserts that are made with other gluten-free white flours and other sweeteners. So that's still, in my mind, not very paleo and not very health promoting. I'm a pretty basic kind of person. Eat vegetables, lots of them, and a little bit of meat.
Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of the criticism that I hear of paleo diet is also just kind of saying, well, our ancestors couldn't have actually eaten this diet, which I think is I mean, what you and I eat every day probably would be difficult for one of our ancestors to get all of those things, but that's not really the point.
No, the point is we're trying to improve our human ecosystem, our human habitat, by making dietary choices that are less based on the refined foods we have today and are more closely aligned with ingredients, plant materials and some animal materials that have minimal processing.
And the version of your diet that I'm following is Wahls Paleo Plus, and that well, I mean, I've been gluten free since maybe 2007 or something. It wasn't, and then gradually I got more and more sensitive to different types of foods to the point where I was basically on a paleo diet before my doctor diagnosed me with whatever I'm dealing with now. So it was easy. It was an easy change.
I had switched to a paleo diet early in my disease. So I've been vegetarian 20 years. 2 years after diagnosis, my MS doctors told me about the paleo diet. A lot of prayer. I went paleo and continued to decline for 5 more years. So the paleo diet's very helpful. For some people, it's enough. For me, it was clearly not enough. I would have to do quite a bit more. Right.
And so, switching to like a keto. So actually, the Wahls Paleo Plus I wanted to mention is that it gets a person into ketosis. It's a bit of a ketogenic diet as well.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And the ketosis is one of those things that I had heard over and over again, and only until recently did I actually learn and start to understand what it actually is. Can we give people an introduction to that?
Sure. So in our cells are little organelles called mitochondria that take the food we eat and process it into ATP. That is what our cells will use to drive the chemistry of life. Our mitochondria can burn amino acids, sugar, or fat. The easiest fuel to burn is sugar and amino acids. And so that's what they'll burn. But if there's not that much sugar around, we will begin to burn fat. And once the mitochondria start burning fat as the preferred fuel, then we develop ketone bodies, and you can measure that in the blood. And so this is what's called the ketogenic diet. It's going to be quite high in fat, pretty low in carbs, pretty low in protein to make those changes.
Yeah, and it's roughly something like, if you're around 75% of calories from fat, you're generally...
So it will depend on the type of fat. If you're doing a medium chain triglyceride fat, and that's in coconut oil, coconut milk, 75% fat will probably get you in ketosis. If you're doing a dairy-based fat, as in butter and cream, now you're going to have to eat 90% fat and have only 25 grams of carbs to be in ketosis. And that is very difficult to maintain a healthy microbiome and nutritional health when you're using a dairy-based ketogenic diet.
Mm-hmm. And so is it really the medium chain triglycerides that are high in the...
well, you make more ketones.
Coconut that...
Right. So you'll make more ketones out of the medium chain triglycerides, and that's a fat that is present in coconut milk, coconut oil. And so I designed my diet around medium chain triglycerides. Coconut oil is the least expensive way of doing that. It's the most easily digested, most well tolerated.
Mm-hmm. And those medium chain triglycerides, am I recalling correctly, they can cross the blood-brain barrier?
Yes, they can. The ketones can cross, and this is great fuel for your brain cells. It will help stimulate what we call nerve cell growth factors to help the brain cells connect more, make more synaptic connections, and to have larger brain volume, better cognition, better memory. This is a very, what we call a very nice neuroprotective strategy.
Right. This is something I've noticed. I had a lot of brain fog, and that has improved a lot since, trying to be in ketosis most of the time.
The first 2 years I was in ketosis, I certainly had the perception I could tell when I was in ketosis, I just had a little greater mental clarity.
Yeah, I can kind of feel it when I switch over. It's like different muscles that are often tight kind of release for me in my back or my legs, etc., and even kind of around my skull, and I can feel it.
Yeah.
I can suddenly my thoughts are sharper. And just to clarify for people, when you're in ketosis, that means that your body is running more off of fat than it is off of sugar, or it's not running off of sugar at all?
You're running off fat.
Okay.
Absolutely. Your mitochondria are running fat. Your sugar in your bloodstream will be relatively low and very stable. Your ketone bodies will be up a little bit higher. And that makes for quite a number of very helpful changes in how we run the chemistry of life.
Right. And the ketone bodies is that acetoacetates and
yes, and hydroxybutyrate.
Okay. And those are so when you're in ketosis initially, I found that I had sort of like acetone breath. Acetone is like a byproduct of creating these ketones. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And when you're talking about the way that ketosis changes the way that life runs, is that part of what's reducing the inflammation?
Probably yes. Getting all the sugars out, reduce the inflammations. You have to be careful when a ketogenic diet does require a lot more planning to make sure it stays adequately nutrient dense and that you're giving yourself enough fiber for your health promoting bacteria.
Right.
So it's certainly possible to do a great job with it, but it's also possible to not do a good enough job. So you feel great for the first year and a half, and then you begin to not feel well because you're creating some nutritional depletions. But because you felt so great initially, people don't realize that their diet's part of the problem. Yeah, it's sort of like
it can take you a year before you realize that you're low on some things.
So it can. It's just that, just like you can be a vegan and maintain great health, but if you aren't careful, you're going to create nutritional deficiencies, and within 2 years, you'll get into serious neurologic problems. The ketogenic diet people, we can do the same thing after somewhere between 18 months and 2.5 years. We can get into trouble if we're not being really careful with the quality of the ketogenic diet.
Right. And the ketogenic diet, I guess, was originally developed to treat pediatric epilepsy, correct?
Yes, in the 1920s.
In the 1920s, they just kind of accidentally stumbled across that if we put these kids in a high-fat diet, they stop having seizures.
Well, at that time, they put them on what was called the water diet. And so it wasn't fat. They were just starving them.
Just not eating.
Seizures went away. It would take several more years before they figured out that you could let them have fat. And so, the challenge with kids was keeping them out of seizures, giving them enough calories to grow, and being nutritionally sound. It is a very tricky concept for those early physicians to navigate, taking care of these kids. And then Dilantin came along, and so there was not a lot of interest in the ketogenic diet because we had
a drug that came out, right?
And so this was really lost probably into the 1960s. And then interest began again.
Yeah, and so then to clarify for people, if you're in a fasted state, at some point you're going to cross over into ketosis.
Absolutely.
It's just that with a ketogenic diet, you can continue eating, continue getting nutrients, and
correct.
Your body behaves in this way that's almost like being fasted.
It's sort of like a fake fast.
Yeah.
Because you get a lot of the benefits of fasting, but we still get some calories. I tell you, once you flip over into ketosis, it is so comfortable. Blood sugar is nice and even. I'll eat once or twice a day. And I will occasionally go a couple days without eating just to have a longer fast.
Yeah, you don't get these spikes of hunger so much. And if you decide that you want to do a fast, getting into ketosis first certainly takes the edge off of that if you're going to do a 1 or 2 day
right.
fast, which is something that I find for myself really reduces inflammation and helps with mental clarity.
Yeah. a water fast. There's many, many benefits for fasting. And interesting enough, most of our major religions and cultures do have periodic fasts or reduced caloric intake 2 to 4 times a year. And I just think that's probably tremendous wisdom on the part of our ancestors to have incorporated that culturally into their belief systems.
Well, and it also from a practical standpoint, it was probably difficult for some of our ancestors to manage to eat 3 times a day.
Well, you never ate 3 times a day. I mean, and if you had food, you'd get to eat, and then you'd run out of food, and you'd have to go out looking for more. So this episodic eating and fasting was just a part of the human experience for millions of years.
And I have seen that there's some research being done around fasting or ketosis in, not that this is the topic of our discussion, but in cancer treatment as well.
Yes, it's very effective for many types of cancers. There's brain cancer studies, lung cancer, pancreas cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, head and neck cancer, breast cancer studies. And these are studies that I'm aware of. There have been very favorable results. In the early parts of these studies, the way people would get to the ketogenic diet was they'd failed everything else. And so this was a salvage therapy that was being offered. Now this is being studied as a primary intervention for these, or as an add-on. It's a very exciting time. I think, I talk about this in my book as to why, if cancer is an issue, why a ketogenic diet is certainly worth considering.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, do we know much about the mechanisms by which that maybe works? Is it because IGF-1 drops so rapidly?
Well, there's a great book, Thomas Seyfried, Cancer as a Metabolic Disease, intense biochemistry, but the last 2 chapters are these case studies. So get the book, read the case studies, forget the front half. But what he's talking about is our cells have remarkable flexibility. Our mitochondria can run sugar, can run amino acids, can run fat, but sugars is preferred. Our cancer cells lose that metabolic flexibility. They can't run on
sugar, right?
They can only run on sugar.
Yeah.
So if you turn off the sugar, the cancer cell is much more likely to spontaneously die. It'll be much more vulnerable to the chemotherapeutic agent. And basically, we're starving those cancers. Now, if you can't do ketogenic, certainly a low glycemic index diet would be my next recommendation.
Right. And I've also read about with the fasting, kind of what happens is that the white blood cells drop after the first couple days, stem cells regenerate, and then some of those white blood cells get... somebody said it was resetting the immune system, but I kind of wanted to understand what they meant by that. Do you have any insight into that?
Well, in sugar and high insulin levels compromise the effectiveness of your immune cells. So getting rid of the insulin, lowering the sugar will certainly improve your immune cells. So that may have been where your colleague was going.
Gotcha. And so what is it about? Do you understand the mechanism by which inflammation gets reduced through being on, say, a ketogenic diet or through fasts?
Well, so a very, very common cause for inflammation, number one is gluten and dairy. So if people are continuing to eat gluten, the amino acid in that protein, for those of us who have a DQ2 or DQ8 allele, will have a marked increase in the production of our inflammation molecules. So often when you're going on a ketogenic diet, you got to take all the grains out because it's too many carbs, you can't get into ketosis. So we're taking out some of the most inflammatory foods. Sugar, because it drives insulin, also ramps up your inflammatory cytokines, and you have to take that out as well. And so most folks will eat some greens, eat some protein, and then have their fats. So what they have likely have taken out are the foods that are particularly very, very inflammatory. Now, if you go completely on a fast, on a water fast, what can happen is we have gluten sensitivity, so we need to take out gluten. We may not have been aware that we have some other unrecognized food sensitivities, much less severe. But if you're on a water fast, you aren't eating those, so your inflammation molecules continue to drop. Now, what most of us sort of forget is it takes 21 days for the inflammation machinery to drop all the inflammatory molecules by half. So it can take a while to get all of that to be fully quiet. But if someone's having a lot of pain, a lot of fatigue, I think inflammation's part of it. Putting them on a very low anthogenic diet or a ketogenic diet can greatly reduce the burden of inflammatory foods.
And what about toxins and detoxification? I've heard. This is one of these things. It's a word that when people hear that something detoxifies you, there's a lot of people who will say, "Well, that's BS because your body detoxifies naturally." But obviously, for some people, that's not working as well as it should.
Yeah, every chemical reaction will have some trash that happens. All of our chemical factories have some toxic trash byproducts that have to be properly managed. Even our biological processes internally have some toxic byproducts that have to be properly managed and eliminated. In addition, because of the changes in all the chemicals we use in our industrial, agricultural, and food processes, we have many more chemicals in the food supply that we have to process, eliminate, and dump. Depending on your genetic enzymes, my enzymes for processing and eliminating toxins will be more effective or less effective. Now, I have since done my own personal genetic testing because in my own health story and in my recovery, I did check my stored toxins and discovered that 2 years into my recovery, I was diffusely toxic with quite a number of heavy metals. 4 years into my recovery, I was completely clean. I finally did my genetics. I thought, okay, clearly I have enzymes that are less efficient at managing the detox processes, which is the case. Now, I had designed my protocol to ramp up the efficiency of all of those enzymes. And I assume in my clinics that people with chronic illness, we probably have enzymes, that are less efficient at how we process and eliminate toxins. And that likely is contributing to why we are not doing quite as well.
And so does that include like the MTHFR?
So it's methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase.
Okay.
So many of us have variations on the enzymes for how we handle B vitamins. Yeah, what I tell folks is there are over 10 million variations, single nucleotide polymorphisms. Probably the vast majority of these are perfectly fine if we have a nutrient-dense diet and manage our stress-reducing and physical activity levels. But when we have a crappy diet, high stress, poor sleep patterns, these variations are far more toxic to us.
Yeah, I think I was like heterozygous MT that gene.
Yeah.
Where there's two different types, right?
Oh, there are many types.
Methylation genes.
Many different methylation genes and many variations of the MTHFR gene.
Okay. So yeah, I've been injecting methylated B12 for some time now because even taking it orally, I just wasn't really absorbing it too well. That certainly has helped a lot. And B12 is one of those things that's very critical in creating these enzymes, building these enzymes to detoxify and things like that, correct?
Yes. We need the whole host of B vitamins to be working very, very well in order to process and dump out our toxins. We need the sulfation pathways, that's the sulfur pathways, to be working really well. And then there are a few other pathways that we'd like to have work well. And, biology usually has some redundancy at multiple different pathways. So ideally you want to have multiple options to process and eliminate your biologic trash.
We're going to take a quick break. Being productive in your business is all about mind management, not time management, which is why I use WP Engine's managed WordPress hosting to host all of my WordPress sites. They have really easy to use DIY tools, so managing my site is as simple as can be, and I can focus my mental energy on the things that I do best, like bringing you this show. I don't have to worry about installing WordPress, I don't have to worry about keeping it up to date, and I don't have to worry about backups or security. WP Engine takes care of all of it for me. With WP Engine's tools, you can quickly launch new sites, protect existing sites, and test plugin updates. They back up everything daily, and you can make changes on a staging version of your WordPress site before pushing your changes live. They also have a built-in CDN. And what does that mean? That means that your WordPress site is super fast. Visit wpengine.com/loveyourwork for up to 4 months free with WP Engine. And when you're mentioning the sulfur pathways, that's why your diet has quite a bit of sulfur vegetables in it.
It helps provide the building blocks to use the sulfur pathways. And I know the cabbage family, onion family, mushroom family, vegetables also stimulate these detox enzymes in a very nice, balanced way. So we improve the efficiency, plus give the building blocks necessary for the detoxification.
And is garlic included in that?
Absolutely.
Okay. And garlic, I believe it's, if you crush it a little bit and let it sit for 10 minutes, does that helps?
It's better.
Some of the enzymes generate.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good thing.
All right. So basically, something like 12 ounces of meat a day, 3 cups of leafy greens, a couple
3 cups of color, and 3 cups of sulfur.
Color. Okay. 3 cups of sulfur.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that's definitely, because a lot of these vegetables have some carbs in them. It's a lot more carbs than your typical ketogenic diet, right?
That's right. So if you're in ketosis, now we're probably 4 to 6 cups, mostly greens, with a little bit of color, a little bit of sulfur.
Mm-hmm. And is it, if someone integrates a little bit of MCT oil in that, will that help make that diet more forgiving as far as the carbs go?
So we talked, and I give very specific guidance as to how much MCT oil or coconut milk you're going to be using. And we're all unique. So if you really want to know, you're going to have to monitor your ketones and make adjustments according to the ketone levels you're achieving.
Right. And the easiest way to do that, of course, is to just get some of the ketone urine strips, right? You pee on them and it tells you, but it's not exactly the most accurate.
It works for 3 months, and then your kidneys adapt, and then it's not accurate anymore. So then
Gotcha.
You really won't know. You'll have to measure blood ketones to know.
Mm-hmm. You have to do the finger prick and get that going, is right. And so what are some of the challenges in studying something like a diet like this and using it as like medical practice?
So if you want to do research, the first challenge is to get funding to get paid for doing the research, because they'll want to have staff that you can pay, and you'll need to have lab monitoring. So research is expensive, and about 2% of grants that are written get funded. So doing research, first hurdle is getting funding. And then doing food-based dietary interventions, that's a lot more expensive to do than a pill, because you have to train someone on the diet. You have to give them a lot of support to maintain this new eating pattern, which is unfamiliar. And so it's more costly to do than a randomized pill where you don't know if you're taking the active pill or the inactive pill. That adds to the cost. And how long does the intervention need to be? In general, dietary interventions need to run out longer than a drug-based intervention. That also adds to the cost.
Mm-hmm. It takes so much more time for the body to adjust to whatever you're studying,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And then, do those economics also make it so that, if someone's testing a drug, it's a little bit easier to get funding because you can sell a drug?
Well, so there's a lot more drug incentive. And so who is funding that study? Is it a drug company funding the study? Is it a university doing some pilot studies? Is it the NIH? Doing dietary studies, there's not as much of an economic incentive because you aren't going to be able to patent that diet and recover those funds.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And is there anything inherent about the complexity of the diet itself in actually measuring results and saying, oh, this definitely worked and this this didn't work?
Whenever we're doing a dietary study, you have to have a way of measuring what people are actually eating and how well that matches what the dietary rules were. And so that's for your intervention group, and then for your control group, what they're actually eating, how that compares to the average American diet. And what often happens is I may have agreed to be randomized, but I really want to be in the intervention group. And since my consent is going to describe both diets, I'm in the control group, and I can say, well, screw that. I've got a chronic disease. I'm feeling bad. I'm not feeling better. I'm going to, read my consent and go back and try and copy what was the intervention diet. So it's not uncommon for the control diet to begin to drift towards the intervention diets, which complicates the assessment plan.
Mm-hmm. And then the reporting of what a person ate, that must be...
So there are a couple ways of doing that. There are questionnaires where you report the usual frequency of foods. That's called a food frequency questionnaire. There's a weighed food record where you weigh everything that you've eaten in that 24-hour period. And then there is a 24-hour recall where you would call me, and with a little script would go through, and I would answer questions about what I ate in the prior 24 hours.
So you're actually doing some research right now with this protocol.
Yeah, we've published several studies. I'm writing up more papers, of course, and we're getting ready, and we're recruiting right now for a study comparing this low saturated fat diet, the SWANK diet, to the Wahls diet. So we are recruiting. If we have folks who have MS and fatigue, we definitely would like to hear from them so we can screen and see if they would be eligible.
And so what does that process look like, the roadmap for developing this and
So
it out?
If somebody wants to be in the clinical trial, they would contact my research team. We would put them through screening questions. If they're eligible, then we give them a form that they would give to their neurologist to confirm the diagnosis. Once we get that back, then we schedule them for the enrollment, and we begin.
And for you, what are kind of the milestones along the way of researching this?
Oh, okay. So the sequence for most research studies will look like this. There's an original case study that you note a surprising outcome.
That's you,
then,
right?
That was me.
Yeah.
Then the next thing we did was a case series where we used electrical stimulation in other with progressive MS and had a favorable outcome. So that was the case series. Then the next thing you do is what's called a safety and feasibility study. So that was the first two papers where we described the first 10 and then the first 20, showing that it was safe, they could do it, it was well tolerated. Then the next study is a randomized usual care versus control. And so that paper we're submitting, we'll see if we can find a home for that. And now we have the next study where we're comparing the Swank diet and the Wahls diet, and I'm recruiting for that one.
And so you also are taking your regular meds along with this diet, and your test subjects are taking their regular meds as well. Does that complicate things at all?
Well, yes and no. You have to control for all these variables. You don't want people stopping things at the beginning of a new study because now you don't know what the effect of abruptly stopping something is. Mm-hmm. So our protocol has always been to keep people on their current medication regimens.
And in your book, I think you did a good job of breaking down how to approach sort of alternative health approaches, whether it's chiropractic care or massages or things like that. If someone has a health approach that they'd like to take, and there isn't yet some kind of a study that's telling them exactly that this is going to work for this thing, is there some sort of a framework through which to think about something like that and decide whether it's worth trying or not?
So, and I talk about this a little bit more detail in my book. I always advise people read widely, so you'll be exposed to a variety of things now because of the internet and social media. And ideally, I'm looking to see, are there any scientific studies that have used this in animal models or in humans, or there's a mechanism that makes this intervention plausible, that makes me feel more comfortable. Then I think about, is this something that has, how big is the potential for harm? So, if you're doing, for example, bee stings, because this is an injection, you could have a life-threatening reaction to the bee venom. And a few people have narrowing of the airway and can get, catastrophically ill from bee venom. So it's not completely without hazard.
I've actually tried to get a bee to sting me before for the treatment of myself. However, I couldn't get the bee to sting me.
So so you're balancing, is there a plausible mechanism? What is the potential downside? Are you risking liver damage, kidney damage? Are you risking severe allergic reaction? So you have to think about those things. Then what is the cost of monitoring? I know a lot of folks got very excited about CCSVI and getting angiograms and balloon jobs to their draining veins. Well, some folks would have trauma to those veins and end up with a stroke. So there's, when you're sticking needles in, doing balloons, there's risk of damage to your structures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of like an economist's expected value calculation. Exactly. Yeah, what are the percentages of chances that this will work? What would be the benefits of that? What are the percentages of the chances that it will not work? How bad would that be? And kind of balancing those things.
And not working, not harming.
Not harming.
Not working and harming. Those are two different questions.
Yeah, if it might work and it has almost no chance of harming you, then
that's very different than might work but has a chance of harming. For example, stem cell transplants. Mm-hmm. We give people potent chemotherapy, kill off their immune cells, and then see if the immune cells will come back and will that reset their immune function, and so they'll recover from their autoimmune condition. If they don't die from having gone through the immune ablation. But if you are becoming rapidly, profoundly disabled from your autoimmune condition, people may be in the position like, death looks less scary than being profoundly disabled, bedridden, and demented. And I feel for these folks, like, it'd be so much simpler to follow the Wahls protocol and try that for 100 days and see how effective that might be, as opposed to taking this stem cell transplant that might kill you during the induction phase.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of what I've heard from some people talking about fecal transplants, that, it has a potential upside,
but there's all these terrible things that you could get, pathogens and stuff from something like that. Is that worth it?
It's very exciting stuff. Fecal transplants are life-saving for people with antibiotic-associated diarrhea, and we have about 15,000 deaths a year. It's very effective for that. And we have observed that some people who are getting their fecal transplant for the antibiotic-associated diarrhea have their incurable other problem also fixed, be it MS or Parkinson's or movement disorders or metabolic syndrome or mental health issues. And so there are studies going on now for a variety of health issues. And there are clinics around the world, Taymont in London. I believe there's some clinics in Australia and New Zealand that are doing fecal transplants. But we are noticing that sometimes unexpected bad stuff happens, that people develop a new and different autoimmune problem or a new and different chronic health problem. So, yes, it's exciting. It's interesting. I understand. I would rather people do that than a CCSVI or a stem cell transplant. But it's not without risk.
Yeah, there's still risk associated, and somebody has to weigh that.
You have to weigh that. In my perspective is the Wahls protocol is so much safer. We have such a safer profile. Eating vegetables and fermented foods is a lot safer than getting the fecal transplant from other donors whose health status you don't know how that will interact with your microbiome community.
Because the microbiome is endlessly complex. We don't yet understand it.
We don't understand it.
Anyway.
If you sort of think about the beginning of life, when we first started developing a multicellular organism and a gut, we brought those ancient single-cell organisms with us in our guts. And we have been co-evolving, living this very symbiotic relationship for hundreds of millions of years. And we depend on them to run the chemistry of life in an optimal way. And we have radically changed what we're feeding them. So we've shifted our microbiome. We're making extinct species that were probably vital to our health and vitality. And just because we've shifted our diet. So the more we can get our diet back to what we were eating for millions of years, thousands of years earlier, the more likely we are to have a healthier, health-promoting mix of bacteria living in our bowels.
And so this is kind of one of the frontiers of humanity or of medicine right now, is the microbiome.
It's a very exciting place to be. We love talking about poop.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it can change the gene expression and personality, or what is known? What is known so far? What is speculated?
Excuse me.
Salud dinero. That's what they say in Colombia.
Oh, thank you. So I've been working on some microbiome lectures. So I was just reviewing the literature the last couple of weeks on this. Every month, we're seeing more papers coming out saying this microbiome looks different if you have disease X as opposed to controls. So we're recognizing that the microbiome, huge predictor of what your health status or your disease status. We're also recognizing that the microbiome is interacting with our brain, and it's influencing our mood, it's influencing our behavior, it's influencing the level of myelin, the level of synaptic connection, so the protection on the wiring between cells, how richly connected your brain is, how large your brain is, your mood, your thinking ability, and a lot of conversation that manipulating the microbiome will be a therapeutic potential for treating neurologic disorders and psychiatric disorders. And I'm like, yes, I've been doing that for quite a few years now, quite successfully, and we do it in our clinic quite successfully. There's great evidence that a probiotic pill doesn't change your gut microbiome much. But if you change what you eat, so you change how you are fertilizing the bacteria in your bowels, you'll have a very big effect.
So it's sort of the so-called prebiotics, not so much the probiotics, the food that you're giving them.
It is the food we are eating, because all the food that you and I eat has two big impacts. One is it will impact our cells, turning genes on and off and giving us nutrition, but it will also be the substrates for our microbiome. And they will eat that food. They'll eat each other's byproducts. So everything we put in our mouth is going to be consumed by our bacteria. So I want to be as thoughtful about feeding my bacteria friends as I am about feeding me.
So the best way to keep a healthy microbiome would be through diets. The probiotics, are they worth taking at all, or
all probiotics that are commercially available are derived from fermented foods. So you can take a probiotic, or you could eat fermented foods and lots of vegetables.
Mm-hmm. And so that would be sauerkraut, but you would have to get non-pasteurized sauerkraut.
Right. You want it from the refrigerator section. It should be live culture. I prefer it to be fermented vegetables. I don't want people having fermented dairy. I much prefer the fermented vegetables.
Mm-hmm. And you can make that stuff at home with the proper equipment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's easy. It's fun. It's a nice family activity.
How about kombucha? Is that just a little too high in sugar?
Well, if you're into ketosis, yes, it may be too high in sugar. You can let it ferment longer. That'll decrease the sugar. Oh. If you're just trying to be a low glycemic index, eating the kombucha would be fine. Or drinking, rather.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, I was like, you mean like eating the kombucha mother?
Well, you could, but then you would have eaten her, and she would be able to have more children, so that would be the end of her.
Maybe just a piece.
Just a piece.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate you taking the time. People can find you. Where can people find you?
So if you go to my website, terrywahls.com, Terry, Wahls, WAHLS.com. We have lots of information there. You can find me on Facebook, Terry Wahls MD, or on Twitter, Terry Wahls. If you have anyone who is interested in our clinical trials, or if they want more support for implementing the program, we have a shop page with a variety of ways of giving people some assistance.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much.
You're welcome.
Love Your Work is brought to you in part by Audible, and they'd like to give you a free audiobook. Choose from over 180,000 audiobooks on any subject you can imagine. Just go to cadavy.net/audible to claim your free audiobook. And there we have it. Now, wasn't that just packed with interesting science around battling inflammation with the ketogenic diet? If you're into the more technical and scientific talk, you should really check out neuroscientist John Cunios in episode 8. Dr. Cunios studies the neuroscience of insightful thinking, and I've used his research to improve my performance in just being creative day to day. And before I go, I've got to ask, do you like books? If you do, sign up for my book recommendations. About 90% will be nonfiction on subjects spanning from biographies to neuroscience. Just go to cadavy.net/reading and get the first set of recommendations right away. This has been Love Your Work, and I'm David Cadavy. The theme music for this show is See in You, performed by the Album Leaf, courtesy of Sub Pop Records. Love Your Work is a production of